So if you saw one of my videos from last week, you would know that I did a video on Resident Evil 9 and about the leaks and theories and rumors surrounding the game. Well, one of the reliable leakers for that video actually goes back to Dusk Golem, and he also leaked some other information, and that is regarding Capcom itself. And apparently Capcom has plans to announce a big game later this year that is going to release next year. Now, before I move any farther with this video, I want to let you guys know that just like with any leak and leaker, always take everything they say with a huge grain of salt. The only reason why I'm talking about this leak is just because I find it to be a very fun and interesting video to speculate about. And that's what I want to do on this episode of Nerd Space. I want to take a look at the different Capcom games and its huge catalog of video games, and try and narrow it down to just 7 games that Capcom could be announcing later this year that we can see released next year. Also, I want to address something that I'm sure is going to come up later in this video if I don't point it out now, but you're not going to see anything from Resident Evil. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if we're going to stick with Dusk Golem's leak, in the same leak he also mentioned how Capcom plans to release a Resident Evil game every 2 years, and with Resident Evil 4 coming out this year and Resident Evil 9 potentially coming out in 2025, that would mean 2024 cannot be a Resident Evil game. Therefore, this list will not include any Resident Evil game. No Resident Evil 9, no remakes. Resident Evil is not an option. So my name is Ruben with Nerd Space, and here are 7 games that could be Capcom's next big game announced later this year. Let's get it.
Is it Halloween already? That costume looks a little big. I thought you had better taste than that.
Number 7, Devil May Cry 6. So with Devil May Cry 5 being such a huge success back in 2019 when it released the same year as Resident Evil 2 Remake, of course, without a doubt, we were eventually going to get a sequel to that game. Devil May Cry is probably one of the biggest IPs next to Resident Evil and Street Fighter in the Capcom library. So it would be crazy not to even consider Devil May Cry 6 as the game that Capcom is potentially going to announce later this year and get released next year. And honestly, I think a lot of people would be really excited to see a Devil May Cry 6. I haven't really dived down into every single Devil May Cry game. However, I did play Devil May Cry 5 and I had a lot of fun with it. So I would definitely welcome a sequel to that game. That being said, there are some downsides that kind of hint to the idea that Devil May Cry 6 is not the game that Capcom is going to announce this year. And the biggest reason for that is because a lot of sources and leakers have been saying that Devil May Cry 6 is in production and it is coming, but we're not supposed to expect this game until 2025 or 2026 even. And if those sources are true, then the fact of the matter is that Devil May Cry 6 doesn't really line up with the timeline of Dusk Golem's leak. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if we're going to stick to what Dusk Golem said, that Capcom is announcing a game this year that is coming out next year, then that would mean the game is releasing in 2024, not 2025 or even 2026. Not to mention, Devil May Cry 6 hasn't really got anywhere in terms of leaks or information or anything like that. Of course, there's been plenty of games that have released without any information leaking before its announcement, but Devil May Cry 6 has strangely been really quiet actually. So it leads me to believe that more than likely, even though production probably has started on this game, it is very far from being complete. Therefore, it's not going to be ready by the end of the year to show off.
Doctor, what's going on? Stand back, everyone. I'll handle this.
Megaman!
Number 6, Megaman 12. So I feel like a broken record because once again, I am going to say that I have never really played a Mega Man game. It's not for me. I'm not really into the side-scroller games, and I feel like a lot of the Mega Man games are side-scroller. And I don't know, something about it is just, it's not my vibe. I really tried looking into it and watch a couple trailers and stuff, but I'm sorry, it's not for me. But I know, once again, there is a huge cult following for this series, and with the success of Mega Man 11, it makes sense that Mega Man 12 has to be right around the corner. Actually, it's been 5 years since the last mainline entry, which was Mega Man 11, and Capcom has teased that we are for sure getting Mega Man 12. However, they also teased the fact that they want to take their time with this game. Actually, a recent interview with investors, they mentioned that Mega Man 12 is something that they do want to take their time with, and they want to make sure it is done correctly and that it's as close to perfection as they could possibly get it. And that was earlier this year. So with that in mind, it doesn't seem like a Mega Man 12 is right around the corner. Therefore, I don't know if Mega Man is getting announced this year and released next year, if Capcom already told their investors that it's probably going to be a while before we even see that game. Number 5, Marvel vs. Capcom 4. So from this point on, I feel like we are in the more credible choices for Capcom's next big game. Honestly, this game and moving forward, I feel like all of them have a huge possibility of being the game that Dusk Golem was talking about. And we are starting this part of the list off with Marvel vs. Capcom 4. And this mainly deals with the fact that a lot of reliable sources and leakers out there are telling us that Marvel vs. Capcom 4 is coming late 2024. And they have been telling us this for a pretty long time now, that this is when we should expect Marvel vs. Capcom 4. And if all those sources, leaks, and rumors are true, then they fall right in line with what Dusk Golem just told us. The timeline makes sense, and also there are a lot of different leakers out there talking about this game. Now, there's a lot of not so reliable leaks out there as well, so I'm talking about the different characters for the game, such as the fact that there are going to be 21 Marvel characters and 21 Capcom characters. But the fact of the matter is while those leaks might be not so reliable, there are some reliable sources saying that we are getting this game next year. Now, me personally, I'm a huge fan of Marvel vs. Capcom. I don't love fighting games, but Marvel vs. Capcom is something that actually gets me invested into it because I love Marvel. I'm hugely obsessed with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and anything Marvel. And then Capcom, of course, has a lot of different IPs that I really enjoyed. Stuff like Ace Attorney, obviously the Resident Evil games. It's such a great crossover to see Marvel and Capcom come together and battle it out. However, just like with the rest of the games on this list, there are no official statements or announcements regarding Marvel vs. Capcom 4. We don't know when it's coming, we don't know if it's coming, we don't know anything at all about this game. But I definitely think it's more likely to be the game that Dusk Golem is talking about, especially over Devil May Cry 6 or Mega Man 12.
Yeah, well, I don't think they had zombie-infested malls in mind when they wrote those regulations, kid.
You know how to use this?
Kinda. I've covered wars, you know.
Number 4, Dead Rising Remake. So we've seen a lot of talks about Dead Rising Remake since May of this year, actually. And it seems like that this game might be getting a remake, which I'm all for because I really love Frank West and the original Dead Rising game. However, one of the most reliable sources out there that are agreeing with the fact that this game is in the works is Jess Corden, who also says that this game is in the works and he's heard a lot of different information come from this game. However, he has yet to see any actual evidence of it. So while we do have a lot of sources and reliable leaks talking about this game, we don't know when this game is coming, we don't know anything about this game, and we don't have any true hardcore evidence that this game is for sure happening. However, that's pretty much the case for the rest of the games on this list. Still, it makes it up to number 4 just because when you have reliable leakers talking about it and saying that it is probably more than likely going to happen soon, then yeah, it definitely gets pushed up there. And as long as the timeline kind of works with Dusk Golem's timeline, then maybe possibly this is the game that we're going to see announced this year and released next year by Capcom. And it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest since Capcom has been on a roll with remaking their IPs, especially their zombie IPs, Resident Evil, hello. So it does make sense for Dead Rising to get a remake. Does it need one? I would argue it probably doesn't in my opinion. but I would have also argued the fact that Resident Evil 4 didn't need a remake, and yet I ended up really liking that game. So who knows, I probably don't know what I'm talking about. Let me know in the comments, do you think Dead Rising needs a remake? And if so, do you think that's a game that's going to be announced later this year? Or do you think it's going to be something else on this list?
These guards were shooting at something very recently.
So who were they fighting?
This wasn't much of a fight. I don't think these guards hit anything before getting sliced and diced. Whatever they were shooting at came in through there, and ripped right through the steel fence.
Number 3, Dino Crisis Remake. Straight up, 100%, this is a pipe dream. I know, I probably shouldn't have this so hype on the list, but I do have some maybe kind of hints and facts pointing to the reason why this could be the game that Capcom announces this year. First off, fans have been demanding this game for as long as I can remember. Ever since we got the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, Dino Crisis have kind of been at the top of the line for what people want Capcom to remake next. And since Dino Crisis is essentially Resident Evil meets dinosaurs, it seems like it's easy money on the table for Capcom to remake this game. And the reason why I do think they are eventually going to remake this game is because Capcom decided to do a remaster for a different survival horror series that is definitely nowhere near as popular as Dino Crisis. That being Clock Tower. For some reason, Capcom is sending out a remaster of the original Clock Tower game. And don't get me wrong, I'm really happy to see that happen. However, I feel like it kind of adds some credibility to the fact that Capcom might be remaking Dino Crisis, and it might be very soon. Because if they weren't, why didn't they do a remaster of the Dino Crisis games? They could have released a trilogy of remasters for the Dino Crisis games. And if they did that, that would be easy money on the table that they could have just scooped up. Instead, for some reason, they focused on doing a remaster of Clock Tower, which, like I said, I'm happy about, but they skipped over Dino Crisis, which tells me that Dino Crisis could be in the works. Like, we could see a Dino Crisis remake, and that would explain why they didn't do a remaster for it, because it would kind of take away from the attention of a remake. Let me know in the comments, do you guys think Dino Crisis Remake is the game that is coming as soon as next year? Or do you think of the other possibility where maybe Dino Crisis remakes aren't coming until after they remake every single Resident Evil game, and then we'll finally see Dino Crisis getting its remakes? Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Number 2, a new IP. So at the start of the video, I kept talking about how I am going to dive down into Capcom's library and figure out which game could they possibly announce. However, there is one other possibility, and that is the fact that it might not be one of their current IPs. It might be something that they might develop completely as a new IP, something similar to an Exoprimal or Path of the Goddess. Those are brand new IPs introduced by Capcom, and it seems like Capcom is kind of on a roll with introducing new IPs. So if that's the case, it is possible that Capcom's next big game, the one that they are announcing later this year, it could just be a new IP. Now, obviously, I don't have any facts or any information or evidence backing this statement up. I just know that with Resident Evil being the main focus for remakes, I don't know if Capcom will actually take a step in the direction of remaking a game like Dino Crisis or Dead Rising. And as far as sequels go, I feel like we're still a little too far out from Megaman and Devil May Cry. So with that out of the way, the big possibility that is still to be considered is the fact that it could just be brand new IP. Dusk Golem never said that it was going to be a big Capcom IP. He said it was going to be a big Capcom game. And with that logic, that means technically speaking, it could just be a brand new IP for all we know. We actually have no idea what this game is going to be, which I'm okay with. Don't get me wrong, there are a ton of remakes I want from Capcom. There are also a lot of sequels to games in their franchise that I also want to see. But I wouldn't be opposed to seeing Capcom take a shot at a different new IP, as long as it doesn't turn out to be another live service game like Exoprimal. I wasn't a huge fan of that. I know there's a lot of fans out there, so I'm sorry if you guys don't agree with me. But personally, I would like to see Capcom take another shot at a brand new IP survival horror game. Because Capcom was on a roll back in the day with creating a ton of different survival horror franchises. Like, everybody remembers Resident Evil, but don't forget, they created Clock Tower, they created Haunting Ground, they created Dino Crisis. Like, they are truly the kings of survival horror. So I want to see them kind of do what they used to do back in the day and start taking more shots and taking more risks at other survival horror games, like just creating new IPs. I think that would actually be a lot of fun to see. I don't know if that's the direction they are going to go, but if they do a new IP, I hope it's a new survival horror IP. Number 1, Monster Hunter World 2. So fans have been waiting for 5 years for a follow-up to Monster Hunter World. That game was such a huge success for Capcom, and that game really inspired a ton of different other games by other studios and even Capcom itself, because Exoprimal was definitely inspired by Monster Hunter World. And Monster Hunter is definitely a huge moneymaker. When you look at the likes of Monster Hunter Rise, that game did really well for Capcom. And a lot of leaks and sources are saying that we are going to get an announcement sometime this year for Monster Hunter World 2. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the franchise. You guys can probably tell because I wasn't big on Exoprimal. I probably wouldn't be big on Monster Hunter. I'm not really into those type of games. For some reason, they don't pull me in. Now, the only thing that could hold it back, the only thing that I can see it from pulling it back from being the game that Dusk Golem is talking about, is just due to the fact that Exoprimal came out this year, and I feel like having Monster Hunter World 2 and Exoprimal coming out like back-to-back years, I feel like it's overkill, especially since Exoprimal is supposed to be a live service game. That would mean that if this game is going to be a live service game and is going to at least carry over for a year or two, then it's really going to be stepping on the shoes of Monster Hunter World 2. And I don't think Capcom would risk that. I think they might leave a little bit more space in between Monster Hunter World 2 and Exoprimal, but that's just my opinion. However, I still believe that this is the most likely outcome when it comes to a game getting announced later this year. I think it's either going to be this, a new IP, or Dino Crisis. And my money is on this game in my opinion. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Space. Guys, hit up the comments and let me know your opinions in the comments as to which game do you think Capcom is going to announce later this year. Do you think it's going to be a remake? Or do you think it's going to be a sequel? Or hell, do you think it's going to be a completely brand new IP? Anyways, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like or dislike button, and share this video with your friends and family. And as always, guys, I will see you on the next episode of Nerd Space. Take care.